Hi, good evening, and welcome to this special FoodSense webinar. So we like to do these FoodSense webinars in parts to support clients, and so this week I'm going to be dealing with a specific client and their question. So the problem statement is they're measuring, and I'm not sure if to say this is Teja or Teja Chillies. My apologies for that. And they've been measuring them in February 2024, just a couple of days ago, and they're not as hot as November 2023. So there's been a sort of change in the apparent hotness of these chilies. And I know I kind of jumped straight into it, but this is kind of part of the sort of support that ZP is able to offer clients. So they're using the FoodSense Generation 4. I love the fact that they're using the FoodSense Generation 4 because you'll see it in a minute that they're basically running it off their smart device. So they've obviously got a smartphone. This makes Bluetooth connection with the meter, and it therefore means that they get the result and we get the data in the cloud and they can share the data with us. Anyway, let me go forward a little bit quicker. So we've got a bit of a, I wouldn't say problem, but at least an interesting thing to solve, which is in 2023, they were getting much hotter than they definitely are getting in February 2024. Now, we are going to add an extra feature to the app, which is actually to allow people to take images of the sample, because it'll be super interesting to see the images. Because I just feel, and I know this is not very good because that in 2023 I think they were potentially testing drier powders, and in 2024 I think they're testing more like crushed up dried chilies. But I've got a suspicion there's a moisture content thing going on here, and I'll describe what I mean by that in a minute. So I know this seems a bit dry, but we're really dealing with the science of chili measurement. So the possible issue I see, and I've talked about this before, is people there's wet weight and dry weight. So when people think about a Carolina Reaper, and here we're talking about Teja peppers, Carolina Reaper, for example, would have a kind of a dry weight of 2.2 million Scoville heat units. But in order to get that weight or get that hotness, you basically need to drive off 88% or 90% of the water. The water content of a chili is actually about 88%. So if you measure any chili and you've left any moisture in there, it can really, it can really affect the actual final result. So when people talk about the Carolina Reaper being 2.2 million, the pepper itself is 220,000 Scoville heat units. It's only when you've driven off all the moisture. Now this is going to be the same for these Teja peppers as well. They've got a reputation for being, if I rounded it up, just around about 100,000. That means that the incoming pepper could be 10,000. Even if you sun dried it, it can shrivel. You can lose some moisture, but it can actually because a lot of that, what it is water has quite a high density. It's kind of 1 gram per mil. It can add a lot of mass to your sample, but not much capsaicin. So you can end up weighing out a bit of chili, but because of the moisture content, you didn't weigh out as much capsaicin as you would have otherwise done if it was drier. So that's something that I'm sort of thinking is the heart of this. It's easier with powders because I think they're quite desiccated and dried out anyway. This is not for these people, but I'm just saying that we are going to get to that specific question in a minute. But at the same time, we do these webinars every month. The next one is on the 27th of March. Don't worry about the link. If you see a link, this link will take you to the 27th of March. We do one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And in those webinars, we will be measuring ginger, and we will be measuring chilies. And I mean, this is just me sort of giving you a background to what we're talking about here. I will deal with this particular client's question in a minute, but what we're talking here is this is the chili sensor. Online, it's sometimes referred to as the chili sensor. We call it the FoodSense Generation 4. Online, sometimes people call it a Scoville meter. It's completely fine. Obviously, people can call it what they want. But it has with these chili sensors that work with a chili meter. There's the app. The app talks to the meter. The meter gives the capsaicin scores or the capsaicin results of the Scoville heat unit back to the app, and the app sends it to the cloud. This is really important because then that person or the users in India at the moment that I'm supporting get the result on their phone. Sometimes they're getting about 10,000 Scoville heat units at the moment, where they're really expecting it to be 100,000 Scoville heat units, and that's what I'm going to deal with in this webinar today. But what's really important is actually every time they do it, their data's going to the cloud, which is fantastic because they've got a really good guy supporting them in India, and then he's also calling me in as well. And actually, what it means is there's a real transparency. Like, it's not just a number. We genuinely can look at the raw signal here and actually say, you know, what is going on. I think so many times that people, you know, get these sort of certificates of analysis from HPLC, and they really can't tell what's going on because it's just a number. So there's a real good transparency, and actually I'm able to see their data from my laptop. Nobody needs to send computer. Nobody needs to send me the data. I'm actually logging in through the cloud so we can give support, and that's what this is about today. It's also got what we call an API, so we can plug into LIMS systems if needed. So it's really good because there's a certain transparency here. You'll see me looking at a lot of raw signal today, because by looking at raw signal, I can really see what's going on. You know, so when the person says, well, it came back at 10,000, you know, and it's like, and I'm like, I can look at the raw signal, so I can see the capsaicin, it's not there, you know, but we'll discuss that now. So we're going to talk about, like I say, I'm not so sure to pronounce this Teja or Teja, if it's the sort of Spanish J, which is more like an H, but let me jump into it a little bit. So we do have our expectations managed, you know, that this is expecting to be around 60 to 110,000 Scoville heat units. I did find this quite interesting. I'll just comment on this as well, that this particular variety is apparently quite good at not possibly getting fungal infections and having or funguses on them and having aflatoxins and ochratoxins. I want to just comment on that as I go through this. If aflatoxins and ochratoxins are interesting to people, they're also interesting to us. I'd be quite interested in understanding whether measuring these on the FoodSense Generation 4 was interesting, because I can obviously look at these structures and think, yeah, we could probably detect them. I have looked, you know, the challenge in detecting these things is possibly the thresholds that you have to get down to 20 parts per billion and 300 parts per billion. But at least I'm interested in whether if people want us to add these to the menu, I'd be interested in getting that sort of feedback that, yes, we want to add these to the FoodSense menu, let's say. So I'd be super interested. I have looked at the maths of this. When people talk about this, they sort of quote these kind of, they quote this range of Scoville heat units, 50k here to 170,000 k here, Scoville heat units, and the mass here of 0.58 if it is capsaicin. So I've done the calculations. I can see that translates to approximately 100k, sort of 94,000 Scoville heat units. So I've checked all the maths. I know what's going on here. In order to have a final product that's fairly well dried out, that incoming chili's probably got about 5,000 Scoville heat units. And to get to the upper range, that incoming chili's probably got a Scoville heat unit of about 17,000 Scoville heat units. And I have looked online, you know, so, you know, I've looked at people's specifications, you know, so they quote, you know, that with 65,000 to 85,000 Scoville heat units, I can see the mass percentage. But I also noticed that the moisture level is 10%. And I know I'm sort of building up evidence for myself that I think this is a moisture content problem. And, you know, that was one particular vendor, and I went to another vendor's website. It was pretty similar. 75,000 Scoville heat units to 100,000 Scoville heat units. And the moisture content on the previous page was 10%. Here they say about 14%. So I know that in order to get these high numbers, you really have to have the moisture content quite low. And I've done this already and said, you know, that, you know, people expect a pepper to be, you know, 2.2 million, but in fact the fresh pepper full of moisture is actually 220,000 Scoville heat units. So there's a 10x difference between being fresh and moist and essentially dry and very desiccated in terms of Scoville heat units. So historically, these people, in about November time, they were actually doing a 1 in 1,000 dilution. I know I've jumped straight into it, but this is a support webinar. It's not a promotional webinar. So I know what they did in November, and they got, I think I was being told by their support, they were getting around, you know, 150,000 Scoville heat units. So, you know, it's highly diluted and it's hot. You know, I get it. It's hot. And this is 1 in 1,000 dilution. I look at their raw data sheet. I can see their capsaicin peaks. So this is the bit where I say, you did have a lot of dilution. the app told you it was 155,000, and your raw data is, is considering that is 1 in 1,000 dilution. I can see the signal here is nice and big, so I can see big signal, high dilution. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. I'm just checking it with the data, make sure everything is looking good. Now you have this, and these numbers don't quite mean a lot to me, although I think I did look online and see that 341 is some sort of recognized quality or something. But what I want to say is you've done a 1 in 100 dilution, so this is less diluted than November, and a signal is really small. So whatever's going on that sensor in 1 in 100, it does not contain as much capsaicin. I can see it. Now you've been advised, because actually, and you've then gone 1 in 10, which is good because you've taken some advice, and I can see that now that it jumps up. So the reason I bring this up is this is not magic. This is science. You've got something that's quite dilute. 1 in 100 shows that it's not as pungent as it was in November. In November, on the previous slide, the signal was higher than this. It was about 2, and you'd done 1 in 1,000 dilution. So it's less dilution and it's still a smaller signal. So there's not so much capsaicin here. And it makes scientific sense because then you did a less dilution and you got, the 1 in 10 was actually more intense. But it's still, both of these sets of data tell me it's not as hot now when you were measuring this in February 2024 as in November 2023. So that's your kind of that's your February 2024 data, and this is your just for historical reference, this is your November data. So here I brought some data where you did Teja Chilli sample, a 1 in 100 dilution, and boom, there's this big signal here, which is basically bigger than, it's approximately 10x what you're now getting. You can see it, this is 1. I know I'm looking at the raw signal, and people don't have to look at the raw signal. It's only when we're troubleshooting that we look at the raw signal. That's 1, and this is 10. So it's kind of, simple maths. It's 10x more concentrated in November than it is in February. Doesn't help you, but now we're going to try and explain why we think this is going on. And I got a suspicion that the samples are quite different between now and then. And I'll talk about images help us a lot, by the way, but I'll talk about that at the end. So 1 in 100, small now, 1 in 100, much bigger in November. Your 341 is also the same. I mean, it's pretty small. 1 in 100, very small. 1 in 10, the signal is higher. So what I can say is that this is fairly mild. This actually reminds me more of Tabasco sauce. When I say Tabasco sauce, I mean those little bottles of Tabasco sauce coming from, I think it's the McKinney company in Louisiana. That's more like what their signal looks like. So let me do some maths here. So let's say I started off with a Teja pepper of 10,000 Scoville heat units. When you first measure that pepper and it's fresh, you've done no desiccation on it, no drying out. So I put 0% here. That chili's 10,000 Scoville heat units. If you dry it out a bit, you take off, let's say 20% of the mass because it was due to water, then that will now have a hotness. It only increases a little bit, but it now has a hotness of, if we get from 10,000, maybe we've gone to about 12,000. Now drive off some more water, we've come to about 17,000. Drive off some more water, we come to about 21,000. Drive off some more water, we come to about 50,000. Drive off some more water, we get to 100,000. You can see really, how critical it is to get water off in order to understand the Scoville heat unit of that pepper. And I think there's a good reason for driving off water when measuring products, because otherwise you're so sensitive to the water content, it can really mess up your kind of repeatability. So I did a quick bit of maths here, but let me pretend that the chili was now 6,000 Scoville heat units. So you have a chili at 6,000 Scoville heat units. You drove off no water. It's just a fresh pepper, 6,000 Scoville heat units. you drove off 20% of the water, and the Scoville heat unit now maybe about, I'm just eyeballing this up a bit, 8,000, something like that. You drove off 40% of the water, you get to 10,000. The reason I bring this up is because some of your results now in February on those peppers are about 10,000. They're 10x less than you're expecting. This would answer it, because I would suggest to you that 40%, if I drove off 40% of the water off a chili, it would look pretty dry, and by eye you would say, oh, that's really quite dry, but actually it's still far away from 90% of driven off the water. So you may not have actually fully dried it out, and if you did, you might get to 90%. If you really believe that you have driven off all the water, then there are other things that we should be talking about, and I will talk about them in the presentation today. But my biggest suspicion actually that there's a moisture content in this material that's basically, when you're weighing out the chili at the moment, you're weighing out chili and capsaicin that's in the chili, but you're also carrying the moisture content with it. And so when you think you're weighed out 0.1 grams, actually there's quite a bit of moisture in there that's essentially, you're really weighing out water, which is a diluent in this case. You put your sample onto the sensor. I got a suspicion that moisture is actually I don't know if those look, this is an opinion, I get it, right? And actually there is a scientific way of determining whether you've dried out a chili or not. You take a chili, you measure it, you measure it when it's fresh, you desiccate it for a while, you measure the weight. Has it lost 10% of its weight, 20% of its weight, 30% of its weight, 40% of its weight, 50% of its weight, 60% of its weight, 80% of its weight, 70%, 80%. When you're getting close to 80 to 90% weight loss, then you've dried it out. So I don't think those look quite as dried out as I would expect. Now the other thing may be this, that actually you have dried it out, and it's in flakes. And if it's in flakes, they're quite large, and actually extracting the capsaicin out of these is going to take longer. So does your material look like flakes, or have you ground it up? If you ground it up, you've increased the surface area, so it's easier now to extract the capsaicin. In fact, have you turned it all the way into powder, so it's very fine, and then you can easily extract the capsaicin. So the reason I bring this up is my suspicion is that you've actually got moisture, and it's no criticism of you. I'm just saying, that moisture will make it look like they're not as hot as they otherwise are. If that's not the case and you're not so convinced, then are you in flake form, crush form, or powder form? At the moment, I suspect you're in some sort of flaked form, actually, and actually they are harder to extract. So if I was to summarize this, what's going on to the sensor today? So you add 50 microliters to the sensor. So you take the FoodSense Generation 4, you have these sensors, you've put 50 microliters onto here. That sample does not have as much capsaicin as you did in November. What are my suspects? It's moisture. You're not as dry as you were in November. That's my opinion. Obviously, I'm not in that lab in India doing this work, but that's, if you think you're dry, then it could be extraction. The smaller the particles, the easier to extract. Are you just chopped up? Are you just crushed? Are you just chopped up? Are you flakes? Are you crushed? So the smaller you make them, the easier it is to extract. Now, if you genuinely think that you're hot, then the longer you leave them, so if you make up an extraction, you leave it overnight, which I think is something you've done in the past, then that should give it a good opportunity to extract. So that could help you. I just want to make a side note. CP is working on adding image taking to the app. So what I mean by this is, it'd probably be easier for us to sometimes support clients, because you make the sample, you put the sample on here, you get a result on your phone, result goes to the cloud, and you can see how effective it actually is. We can see your data and actually help troubleshoot. But we're also thinking then of actually prompting to, maybe you could the option to take a photo then of the sample, and that goes to the cloud. So then you've got data and sample and photo, and you can understand then that actually it makes it easier to troubleshoot. So that might be a little feature that we're going to try and bring to the app. So I want to say thank you. This is for a particular client. We do try to anonymize those responses and those answers. And this is my first thought. So when you as you give me more information through your support in India, then I will try and dive into this a little bit deeper. But I have tried to give you my initial thoughts on this. So I want to say thank you very much. When you watch this, delighted to help. I mean, I think it's like we say that we when we ship the FoodSense, everyone gets personalized training. We do support through these weekly webinars, and we do monthly webinars as well, where we do the live demonstrations and stuff like that. Oh, I just want to say hi, Ali. Just sorry, it's just like a good friend of ours is online. So have a good Saturday evening, Ali. Lovely to see you. Okay, take care. Thank you very much.